Good morning, Math 20-3. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to start working on something called compound interest. So, if you remember yesterday, interest is what we did. We did simple interest, which doesn't actually happen in the real world very often. Compound interest is much more what happens. So, yesterday, simple interest, we were calculating how much money you owe someone in order to borrow money. So, remember, we said, if somebody gives you $100 and then they want $10 in interest, then you owe them $110, right? It's the money you pay someone for borrowing money. You can also earn interest by giving the bank money. So if you put money into the bank, that money will earn interest because essentially you're giving the bank money to borrow and invest and do stuff with. Simple interest is nice. It's kind of a quick way to estimate how much money you're ever going to owe someone or they'll owe you, but it's just not really realistic. More often than not, when you see mortgages or car loans or visas, they do something called compound interest. And what compound interest means is that when you borrow something, say you borrow $1,000, they're going to charge you interest every month. So that's called compounded. So they'll be like, okay, after 1 month, you owe me $10 more. And the reason they do that is because then they can charge interest on their interest. So then the second month, they'll say, okay, you owe me $10 again, but then you also owe me $1 for those first $10 of interest you didn't pay me for. It's like making money on the money that you already owe somebody. What it does is it racks up your amount owed in interest much faster, which is why banks do it. We'll just kind of jump into some questions and some investigations so you can see what I mean. This question here, calculate the closing amount in a savings fund if $500 invested for 3 years. So remember, we always had our investment amount. We called that our P value, our principal. Then we also had a time, which was our T value. So that was 3 years. Awesome. And then you'll notice they gave you your rate over here, which we would change to be 0.095. So they gave us three things. They gave us P equals 500. They gave us T equals 3. They gave us R equals 0.095. Awesome. To calculate how much interest you owe, we did interest equals P times T times R. So if you put this in your calculator, it's 500 times the 3 years times the rate of 0.095. And that will tell you how much interest you owe. So 500 times 3 times 0.095. You owe $142.50 in interest. What did it ask me to find? So that's how much money it earns. You earn $142.50. Awesome. This next question says you have 9.5% interest compounded annually. So when it tells you it's compounded annually, that means they're going to charge you interest every year. This simple interest that we did up here only charged you interest at the end of the 3 years. So for this, things change a little bit. We now have to calculate something called N. That's the number of times you're going to get charged interest. So for us, there was 3 years times the fact that they did it once every year they charged you for a total of 3 periods. The interest rate per period, annual interest rate is 9.5%, or 0.095, divided by the 1 period every year. That would give me a total of 0.095. All right. We're going to use charts to show us what this looks like. So this is my opening balance, 500. In the first period, so the first year in this question, because it's every period is 1 year. That's how they're compounding it. The interest rate for that period will be 0.095. This means at the end of the first year, if you were to multiply 500 by 0.095, That will tell you the amount of interest that you owe after 1 year. You would owe $47.50, meaning that you now have in that account $547.50. The way I got that number was I took my opening balance and I added my interest to see what my total was at the end of 1 year. Now we have to do this calculation again for the second year. So for the second year, my money doesn't start at 500 because there was some interest, right? So now my money starts at 547.5. The interest rate hasn't changed. To figure out my interest earned, I go 547.5 times 0.095. 547.5 times 0.095, $52.01. To figure out your closing balance at the end of 2 years, we need to add that 52.01 plus my opening balance of 547.5 to get a total amount of 599.51. That is how much is in this account now after 2 years. To figure out at the end of 3 years, my opening balance at the start of year 3 would have been 599.51. My interest rate still has not changed. If I multiply my opening balance by my rate, it will tell you how much interest happens in the third year. 599.51 times 0.095 gives me $56.95. You add that 56.95 plus the opening balance of 59951, and you find that you have a new total in your account of 656.46. Awesome. Now, if we think about this, so it's much harder to calculate compound interest, right? It took a lot of time. We had to take our opening balances, figure out the interest in 1 year, add it to the amount, then do it with a new opening amount, do it again, do a new opening amount, do it again. But that is how you would figure out the total amount that ends up being compounded when you use this interest strategy. If you look, the amount of interest earned would be all these numbers added together. If you added them all together, that will tell you how much interest happens. So for instance, we go 47.5, 52 plus 0.101 plus 56.95 gives us a total of 156.46. If we compare that to our simple interest answer, 146.5, 156.46, you'll notice that we actually have a higher number. Again, it's higher because they're charging interest on the interest after every year. They're making money on their money, essentially. All right, let's try another one. So we have a savings fund that has $2,000 in it. It says calculate the closing amount in a savings fund if $2,000, so that's my P, is invested for 3 years, that's my T, with a simple interest of 14%, that's 0.14, right? We divide it by 100, and that's my R. We know that interest equals P times R times T. If you put those in your calculator, that means the amount of interest is 2,000 times 3 times 0.14. That means the amount of interest in this account is $840. The question actually asked me, what is the closing amount? So the closing amount would be 2,000, which is what I started with, plus my 840 interest, to give me a total of $2,840 in my savings account. That's using simple interest. So that's assuming that at the end of 3 years, that's when they give you your interest. The next question says that your interest is being compounded semi-annually. Semi-annually means twice or 2 times a year. So they're going to charge you every 6 months. All right, N. So this is going to be the period. N equals the number of years. So we had 3 years in this question. Times the number of periods in 1 year. There's 2 times I'm being charged in 1 year. That means there's 6 different times total that they're going to charge us interest. The interest rate, though, is going to change a little bit. So the annual interest rate is 0.14. But to figure out the new compounded interest rate, we divide it by the number of periods in 1 year. We have 2 periods in 1 year, right? They're going to charge us twice every year. So we're going to take that number and divide it by 2. Because they don't actually charge you the full 14% every 6 months. They break it up and they're going to charge you 0.07 every 6 months. So they do help you out a little bit. Okay. With this new information, we're going to try filling out a chart to see what it would look like at the end of 3 years. We have a new column here. So this is our time period. Just for fun, I'm going to go in years. So the first time period would be half a year or 0.5 years. Then my second one would be 1 full year, right? Because they're charging me every half of a year, every 6 months. This would be 1.5 years, right? It's 6 months later. And then it would be 2 years. Then it would be 2.5 years. Then it would be 3 years. So those are the time periods we're talking about here. We're talking about every 6 months. The interest rate is never going to change for these questions. So the interest rate per period will be that number that we calculated, 0.07. Right? It's the same rate for every 6 months. Cool. Now we need to fill in the rest. To figure out the amount of interest earned, you're going to go opening balance times your interest rate. So for us, it would be 2,000 times 0.07. And that will tell you how much interest happened in the first 6 months. In this case, it'd be $140. Meaning that my closing balance in this account would be $2,140. That's the opening balance plus the interest earned. We move on to the next part. So the next question, we are now starting in period 2 with $2,140. That was the opening amount. I then am going to multiply that by the interest rate. So times 0.07. And that will tell me my amount is 149.8. If I add the opening balance and the interest earned, that will give me my new closing balance after my full year, my first year, is 2,289.8. Wonderful. I want you to try to pause the video and see if you can fill out the rest of this chart using the pattern. Okay, so you put in the opening balance, You're going to multiply by your interest rate. You're going to find your new closing balance. Okay, I want you to try to finish off this chart. So pause the video, fill out the chart, unpause, see if you have the same answers as me. So if you did that, you should have got this as your chart. You should have been taking your opening balance, multiply it by your interest rate to find out how much interest you're getting charged for that period of time, and then getting a new closing balance by adding the opening balance with that interest rate. Your total amount of money in your account after 3 years was $3,001.47. If we compare that to the question above, right, it was only $2,840. It's gone up a decent amount, almost a couple $100 extra, just by compounding your interest rather than doing a simple interest. So you need to be very aware in like real life situations when they say, oh yeah, we're going to give you a car loan, but we're going to compound it monthly, that they're actually charging you a lot more interest than it might seem. And that is how almost all loans that I know of work. That's how Visa bills work. That's how mortgages work. It's how my car loan works. It's how my student loan works. It's how pretty much any loan works. They will charge you interest. Sometimes they'll charge you interest daily, and then they will charge you extra interest the next day on that interest. And it just keeps going up and up and up. It's also why it's so important to pay off your debts so that you don't have interest getting charged on your interest all the time. Okay, for today, you're not going to have a practice problem. So you're not going to have to work on your practice sheet today. All you have to try to do is complete example 3 of this question. So I want you to pause right now and try to answer number 3, and then I will fill in the answer, and then you are done for the day. So pause the video, see if you can do question 3 on your own for practice. Sorry, you also might want to know for this question that quarterly would mean 4 times in a year. Now keep going if you wanted that little hint. All right, so those are your answers for question 3. So the first part, we had to just take our interest, multiply by our principal, our rate, and our time to get a total of $125 in interest. Right? That $125 plus the original amount gave me my $1,375. If we look down here, we then had to make a chart for quarterly. Quarterly means 4 times a year. So that means I had to go ahead and find my new interest rate by taking the actual interest rate, which is 0.1, and then dividing it by 4 to give me my new compounded interest rate of 0.025. So notice that's my interest rate for every compounded period. Then I went ahead and I filled out this chart. This is what your chart should look like. Check yours, make sure it's the same. Your final closing balance should have been $1,379.76. Tomorrow we are going to finish off these. If you want to actually try to do these for homework, that'd be good. So question 4, there's a couple charts there. And then you will have your practice assignment for tomorrow as well. Take care of the rest of the day. I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.